Greetings. Today I'm going to talk about Addictive Drums 2 and some pretty simple production methods that you can use to get a bit of a bigger sound out of it, particularly in an electronic music context. I'm going to be doing a quick breakdown of one of my recently released tracks as my alias Luo called Nightmares, which is taken off my EP called Darkest Shapes. Just for fun, I am also going to break down some of the other layers in this track, like the kind of gnarly synths and the 8-string guitar. I've made two kind of previous videos, mainly all about Addictive Drums 2, with the first one being how to create your own preset kit tones from scratch. The second video after that was then about how to connect Addictive Drums 2 up to an E-kit, like this crusty old Roland TD3, so that you can actually play in your own grooves into your DAW. Is what is helping me to demo and record drums at home. However, there are still some other production methods that we can implement once we've got some grooves recorded into our DAW using these methods, which I thought I would showcase a little bit in this video. So here goes. Alrighty, so I've got in front of me the project file for a track of mine called Nightmares, and I would have started out with something like this. And this is just using my own custom preset kit.
Great.
So what I also did with this was, it's just a looping pattern. I would have grabbed this kick pattern and then just dragged the whole thing back 1/16th note. And then you'll kind of hear how that ends up making the kick orbit around the snare. And yeah, starting with something like that. So that's my initial groove. And, you know, it sounds kind of cool. I like my kit preset. However, you will notice as soon as I go to the next stage here, there is quite a lot further that I could go with the sound of this, or just, you know, there is something that Addictive Drums kind of does inherently lack, especially when you're running it in just the stereo output mode. So this is it just playing from Addictive Drums, and all you're hearing is the Addictive Drums preset. Let's have a listen to that layered up with some samples. That obviously does a fair bit for that groove, and it kind of lifts out a little bit more. Definitely sounds quite a bit punchier. So I'm going to talk about why that is, or what I've done. So using that MIDI that I created, so I can grab all the kick MIDI. And what I've done is I've brought that onto a separate software track, which I've loaded up an instrument rack with just a kick drum electronic sample on it. I think from memory, this might actually be one of Mr. Bill's kicks that I've bought from one of his packs. You can hear that the transient of that does just cut through a little bit nicer than the Addictive Drums kit. And you can sort of hear compared to just the fact that the transient from this electronic sample, I guess, is a lot sharper. It just cuts through the mix a lot more than the Addictive Drums does by itself, right? You can see here in the MIDI now for what the Addictive Drums are doing. I've kept the ghost note from the snare and the main snare accent and the hi-hat, but now the kick is being handled by the sample, which is in this track of its own here. And that means, you know, I can... But then that makes it very easy for me to kind of process that kick separately. I can put EQ on it or sidechain it all separately from the rest of the drums. It's nice and easy. You can see I've done the same thing with the snare. And then I've got a bunch of these other layers of percussion that I've sequenced in, which are again samples. So got some little sample shakers there. But yeah, so if I just solo the Addictive Drums by themselves whilst they're looping, and then I'll gradually add everything in so you can kind of hear what each thing does. So Again, you can hear the shaker, just again, that adds some transient to the hi-hat part. So this thing here, again, is pretty subtle. It's not really doing much to add to Addictive Drums, to be honest. It just adds to the groove overall. But yeah, it's this weird little, so it's just like this off-note 16th pattern thing. It's meant to occupy all the hits that the kind of the hi-hat isn't hitting on. Here you can see I've added a clap sample, which is to sit on top of this main snare here. So it's just essentially like, you know, throughout your arrangement, you can bring in extra samples, or for example, it can be nice to bring in a clap over the chorus part of the drums, because that will just give it some perceived emphasis or lift when it suddenly kicks in with the clap there. And yeah, again, just at the bottom here for this section, there's this little ride track, which I've done with, and I could have used Addictive Drums too for a kind of more realistic ride sound, but actually there, I want it to be this more drum machine electronic sampled ride. Then this Reaktor beat glitches track. I mean, I've made quite a few videos and gone into this technique in a lot of detail before. But yeah, essentially you can just load up any drum machine kind of thing. And then put a bunch of glitch plugins that make it do random rhythmic stutters and things like that. And then after that, you put on a plugin like Texture by Devious Machines, which enables you to then put kind of nice Foley layers and stuff like that applied to these rhythmic stuttered glitches. So you get all this kind of wild, gnarly... And yeah, that all layered together gets you this kind of crazy beat sandwich, which I think is a lot better than what we started out with. Addictive Drums is still doing its thing in there, even though I'm not using the kick as much or the snare. The toms and the cymbals are still performing quite a useful role in this track, and especially at those moments there where I kind of want to add some fills, they are still doing something pretty cool. So it's the blend of all of this together, I think, where things start, you know, really coming alive. And so that's kind of the trick. It's kind of like combining in some electronic drum samples, which has got stronger transients in over Addictive Drums, or you know, sometimes outright replacing the entire kick from Addictive Drums, but with an electronic sample. I personally think that that does a lot to enhance the heft or the weight. Here are some of my other top tips when it comes to getting a slightly better sound out of Addictive Drums too. One quick little trick that you can do with Addictive Drums to get a little bit more out of the snare is to actually duplicate the entire main snare accent track so that you've got it happening on two different parts of the snare. So you can hear without it, the snare sounds a little bit weak. That gives us a little bit more body in the snare sound, which is quite nice to add. Something else is Addictive Drums 2 does have these Flexi slots built into it, or you can kind of layer up triggered samples with it only allows you to do this with the kick and the snare. If I link the kick to this Flexi slot 1, there's quite a few of those built into Addictive Drums, so you can experiment a lot with the different tones and try and get the perfect trigger sound that way. Another thing that you can do obviously is to link the snare, for example, to a clap, but this doesn't always work in the way you might think. So let's link this snare to this clap here. And the problem with doing that, as you're about to see, is because it's linked, it's also layering up all of these ghost notes, which obviously I don't really want it to do. I only want the clap to layer with these main snares here. But by linking it that way, you can't control that, which is a little annoying. So that starts to sound a little bit silly. But of course, what you could then do is just find where that clap sample lives in the piano roll, and then you can just manually add it in. You know, you can decide where that clap is actually playing rather than using the link feature. And the link thing does work for certain experimental vibes. So for example, if I link the snare to this clap stack now, that actually might sound kind of cool. Or for example, we could layer 2 snares together, which again, so that can be quite a fun, cool way to get a little bit more out of AD2 and get it sounding a little bit punchier within the plugin itself. Something else that can be fun to do, or is quite effective, that I've been getting into recently, is just basically using a clipper. I'm going to grab the output of this clipper and just bring that down to -6 before I do anything, and then I'm going to start driving up the drums into that. So I like to set that to where it starts kind of breaking up, where you can hear it distorting the sound of the drums and just giving it a little bit of a kind of a driven saturation thing. That will actually do a lot to help it punch through in a mix and get the maximum level possible that you can get out of these drums. But be careful. Sometimes that might actually work though. You'd be surprised how far with this you can go in context without sort of noticeably hearing the distortion in your mix. So that's quite a useful tool to get Addictive Drums 2 up to that kind of competitive punchiness of electronic samples. But let's put that somewhere sensible. So that's some tricks. Just my last couple of tips with this. If you are doing what I'm doing in this track where you're layering up a kick sample with that, for example, like I've got this kick in here now again. So that's quite a lot of kick now, and it's up to you. I personally feel like, you know, if I'm using this electronic kick layer as my primary kick, then I don't necessarily need all of the main kick hits still to happen in Addictive Drums 2, right? But in the case of a pattern like this, where there's quite a lot of these doubles or these other things happening with the kick pattern, having all of those happen on the sampled kick might start to sound a little bit fake, like that there. So I mean, you can do that, but it starts to sound a little bit robotic. So you can sort of try and mess around with that by removing the quieter doubles from the triggered. And then basically you're only using the kick sample for the real main accent kick hits. And then Addictive Drums 2 can take care of the kind of fill notes. And then that way you get some kind of interplay between the kick from AD2 and your sample. And it's just kind of like controlling the amount of kick in the mix, because yeah, I feel like layering too much starts to make things a bit hard to control. So let's see what that kind of thing sounds like. That actually might sound slightly unnatural now. So at this point, it might be an idea to maybe try putting that kick on a tom, which is very easy to do in this kind of setup. So let's try a tom there instead of a kick and see how that blends in with the electronic kick. And I might also go rack tom, floor tom. Things like that to kind of make the electronic kick sit in a little bit nicer. And the same applies with the snare track. So with something like that, again, I think the snare sample layer might only really need to be happening on the main snare ones, and then leaving that breathing space for Addictive Drums to kind of fill in the gaps might sound a bit more natural. And with something like that, you've got to play around with it to try and get the best result, basically. So there, I might remove that. I'm not sure if I even need these two here, really. I might get rid of those as well. That gives a bit of a breathing space for Addictive Drums 2 to do that fill moment. So it's that kind of thing, and kind of thinking about how your samples are arranged with Addictive Drums 2 and how Addictive Drums 2 is arranged with the samples, and kind of messing around and experimenting a lot with the interplay between all of these elements, I think is what kind of gets me there in the end. And hopefully by showing that, I hope that it offers some helpful, useful tips for other people with your own programming. After that, I would have added bass. I'm basically just going to use that kick MIDI because it's pretty easy. Because I've got that isolated on its own track, I could just copy that onto a bass synth track, and then I've basically got my bass synth MIDI hitting behind it. That is a synth-based preset, which is coming from Serum. And again, yeah, so I basically just got my hands on Serum and was messing around with the presets inside it and got really excited, heard this one and was like, I can probably make a track around that. But I would have changed some of the settings and had a mess around with it. And you can see what I've also done is added an erosion and an OTT afterwards. So I'll see what those do to it. And then adding the erosion. Again, adds that kind of like hissy transient, which again I think brings it out behind the kick and kind of makes it sound a little bit punchier behind the kick. And then finally the good old OTT multi-band compressor preset. So basically just making it sound a bit more aggressive. Where things are going to get really fun is with the next preset, and this. So that's quite... So that is pretty cool, and kind of trying to use it like, almost like it's an 8-string guitar, or thinking about it as this kind of like terrifying, djenty riff producer. So I'll show you what that sounds like. Pretty good fun. And yeah, so what makes that really interesting is having MIDI notes overlap with this one, because it's like it's got portamento enabled. I can determine where the pitch shift overlaps kind of happen. So for example, if I drag that, so that's pretty ridiculous. So if I wanted to start from like a really low pitch and go, which is ridiculous. But yeah, here I want it to just kind of waver around the F sharp note. The reason why I've gone for F sharp is because that is the lowest note on my 8-string guitar in its standard tuning. So I'm programming this so that I know it's going to fit with my 8-string later on. You can see also what makes this really cool, or kick off. If I grab a really, really short, you know, if I grab that note and shorten it like a lot, and then put these little, you know, and putting a few of those kind of like in between those bigger notes, which are like the main rhythmic stabs in time with the kick drum, is now getting me some crazy details happening around that. I haven't put any other effects on this preset. It is just purely Serum by itself. So, and then basically what I've done is just got the 8-string guitar and then just layered up the bass drum pattern with it. I've double tracked it, so I've got a left and right. I'm running, what am I running on that? Archetype Abrasive, and this preset called Inner Assassins, and I've probably got that duplicated to the right channel as well. Yeah, so it's both the same preset from Archetype Abrasive on the guitar there, and then when I add that in over the top of the synths, that is cooking. In this section here, I add these kind of trance-like electronic synth pads. And then these are some of my kind of ambient choral style vocals that I've definitely put a plugin called Little Altar Boy on that by Sound Toys as me. So again, it's kind of bringing that electronic pad vocal vibe to this. Eventually you get to this kind of halftime version of the groove, and literally the only thing that changes here is the snare placement. Everything else, I think, stays rhythmically the same. So yeah, all that really happens in that section is the snare changes, and it's going to a halftime backbeat at this point. And then you've also got this little break in the pattern where you get this little cut silence. I haven't really mentioned them that much, but you got some reverse crash samples here, which is doing the kind of the whoosh thing. And then my good old trick of often putting in a reversed snare sample as a whoosh and putting them in little gaps like that. Yeah, it just adds a nice little impact coming back into that after that gap. And I think it just makes it sound extremely heavy coming back in after it, I think so. And then we get to this bit, which is like, I mean, I'm really into the sound that I managed to make. It's absolutely horrible, and I love it for that. So I've got this kind of terrifying, glitchy synth arpeggiator thing here, which sounds a little bit like this. But to recreate how I would have arrived at that sound, I'm pretty sure what I would have used is, I've got this other Serum preset that I was messing with. It's kind of meant to sound like a siren or like a sawtooth wave thing. And the idea is that the pitch, if you just hold down a note, the idea is that the pitch is just kind of constantly fluctuating up and down around a semitone. So if I show you what that sounds like. Putting that in over that kind of riff there. So that's pretty terrifying by itself, but we can make it even worse. I'm going to put on a MIDI effect in Ableton, which is the arpeggiator device. And basically what this is going to do. So you can hear that arpeggiator is now triggering that synth, but it's just playing the one note and it's just going do 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 do. So if I change the rate, and now if I add steps, which is basically, it's the number of octaves above my input note that the arpeggiator can also put notes up to. So if I add a step or two to that, and now with the rate set at 16th notes. Oh, and the other thing to do was to change the style to random. So you can hear that that's playing a pattern and it's going like diddle 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 constantly. I want it to just randomize when it's choosing to access those octaves above my input note. So if I do that now, check this out. Okay, we've got some fun, terrifying techers and quite interesting synthesis stuff going on there, but it's not enough for me. I want to make it even worse and more terrifying. So I'm going to put this plugin called Live Cut on it. Again, I've made videos about this before. It's basically an automatic glitcher. So in context, Then we also get to this, like, this is my, what I call my Reaktor filth bass. So this is just kind of like a kind of distorted Reese bass thing that I made in Reaktor Blocks, which is this really cool way to use Reaktor. It's basically kind of turns it into like a digital modular synth environment, and you can build your own patches from individual modules like this. Thankfully, I've laid it out relatively clearly. So it's 2 oscillators that feed into a filter each, and then these end up combining into one kind of tone together. Then that's getting applied to this third-party bit crusher module. So this isn't actually built into Reaktor. I would have had to add that to it. And then I've got this all feeding into another driver and then a reverb at the end. And yeah. So yeah, it's kind of my own custom gnarly synth sound, and I can change the... And that works quite nicely in context here at the end of all of that, as this kind of like space establishing, but quite cathartically heavy, drawn out synth bass thing. I think it's kind of a cool workflow or way to think about what you can add to Addictive Drums after you've programmed your initial groove with it. But anyway, I hope that that was fun and insightful. If you've enjoyed this, then you can find it on all streaming platforms and Bandcamp. If you just search my name or Luo, The Darkest Shapes, I'm sure that you'll be able to come across it. But yeah, that is all for now, and thank you for watching, and I shall hopefully catch you in my next upload. But until then, take it easy.